The world is getting crazier. People are acting more and more insane. The end of the world is tomorrow. Tomorrow. There's only one thing to do when the world is falling apart. Listen to Basil and Gonz as they discuss this week's news and events through the lens of Bible prophecy.
You are listening to Canary Cry News Talk.
You are listening to Canary Cry News Talk. It is October 27th of 2025. It is episode number 887, Alien Atlas. My name is Gonz, at Face Like the Sun, director of the Age of Deceit films, your favorite Asian provocateur for Christ, live to tape from the metaverse to bring you the best news, which is the gospel message of Jesus Christ, while reporting the egregious with a well-rounded, biblically grounded take on world events. It is Monday.
Gary, what day is it? Monday.
And I thought Basil would be back by now, but he is not. I just needed to make sure there was a pulse, and I did get confirmation that he is alive and well. So he's still out there. He'll be back maybe Wednesday. I don't know. It'd be bad if he missed episode 888, but it is what it is at that point. We might do a big catch up on all the producers on Wednesday or possibly next Monday. It kind of depends on when Basil's back and ready to go. But he is alive and well. I think he's home. I don't know. I'm not sure where he is. Not great communication going on there with how long he's going to be out for. But I'm also in a rush. I don't know if you can tell. I'm all a little hyped up today because I just found out I need to go pick up the child in about an hour. So I was hoping for a longer episode, maybe a 2-3 hour episode, but it looks like it's going to have to be crammed into 1 hour, which is fine. It lets me not ramble for too long about things. But a lot going on, and we'll just dive right in. But I want people to know that, we are ongoing. We're going to continue pressing forward. We're always going to try to publish an episode as long as the Lord is willing to lead us in that way, and until the train stops or, it's clear to us that we're done with this mission, we're just going to keep pushing. And we faced so many obstacles and challenges over the years, whether it's someone trying to lob lawsuits at us or shut down the channel, or copyright claims, or, saying we're heretics, or saying I'm a reptilian, or, we've literally experienced almost YouTube shutting us down, different platforms shutting us down, getting threatened to be shut down by PayPal. And so we've gone through a lot. And so we're not fazed by a lot. And that's part of the makeup of the show, the character, and the I don't know, it's sort of like leaning on the Lord to get that wisdom, and I was going to say motivation, but motivation is very fleeting, as I've been talking about in recent episodes. It's more just this consistent tug, this pull, this push, whatever you want to call it, this Holy Spirit thing that we just got to keep going, especially right now as things, here's a thought that I had recently where, when we first started publishing research and, documenting things and interviewing people on this platform, Canary Cry or Face Like the Sun, these topics that are mainstream or quasi-mainstream now, a lot of it was taboo. Now, of course, there were people that were writing about it and researching it and things of that nature for decades. So it's not like we were the first ones on the block, but we did show up and recognize that the people discussing certain things, very small group, not a whole lot of attention on the topics. And as time went on, some of the topics became more culturally popular, like the Ancient Aliens thesis, when the History Channel started to really publish and push that show. And so, culturally, they've been bringing up a lot of topics that are now pretty much mainstream. Everybody more or less has heard about, or at least if you're a Christian, you've likely heard about the Nephilim. You may not know what it is, but I think a lot more people are familiar with the idea of giants and Nephilim and stuff. But also, the topic of aliens is very much in the culture because of what the government has been doing in the last couple of years with disclosure and Now there's a new documentary coming out that we touched on last episode. So there's a whole lot going on. But one thing that we've continued to preach on this show, apart from just the gospel, which is obviously the most important thing, is that we are in this, number one, it's a spiritual war, obviously. We've said that from the beginning. You can look at 1 John 4, talking about the Antichrist spirit that's gone out. It's been there, pushing back against truth for centuries, for millennia. So that's not new. But some of the terminology, maybe the labels that are being used to discuss some of these things, they continue to shift, which is challenging for people to have conversation about it, frustrating for scholars or armchair scholars to discuss these things publicly, because you have a definition, a working definition of certain things that you've been taught, and the paradigm that you've been working through. All of a sudden, definitions start to change or shift around a little bit, or it means something different culturally. And so the conversations, people start talking past one another. And I'm noticing that a lot with many different topics. One of them being the Israel issue right now, the JP, as they call it, the Jewish problem. Now, 10 years ago, I think it was exactly 10 years ago, when I started asking geopolitical questions about why is America sending billions of dollars to Israel's defense when we can't even handle our own streets. It was more of a logical geopolitical question. It wasn't about the Jewish people. It wasn't really even about Israel's place in Bible prophecy, although I did go into that in my own way. But it was just this geopolitical question, and that I was ostracized, basically canceled from the Bible prophecy circuit of people because I was asking some of those questions. Now, it is the talk, at least the last year and a half, maybe 2 years since the October 7th thing, it's been the talk. A bunch of people who would consider themselves truth seekers are now all in on Jewish hate, right? They're like, hey, we hate Jews. We hate all Jews. Jews are all bad, right? When really, for the most part, they're talking about political Zionism. They're not talking necessarily about ethnic Jews, although some people go into some of the histories that surround some of that, and that's murky. It's all not clear. We know about the Rothschilds, how they took over banking, how they're in charge of central banking, and how that has trickled for the last few hundred years to shape our fiat world today, our debt-based economy today. And so sure, you can place the blame there, but it's more of a spiritual problem, right? It's highlighting the fallen nature of man more than anything else, at least in my perspective. It's somebody has to take the blame, whether it's Jews or it's the Vatican and the Jesuits, or it's the Democrats, or somebody always has to be the scapegoat that carries the blame. And right now there is a big influx of people, largely conservative, a lot of Republican type people, a lot of Christians that are discovering this Jewish problem. That, oh my goodness, such a small population, they control so much. Yes, they have influence in our world. When I say they, it's like people who are Jewish descent. But I think more of the issue that we see is a political one, and it has to do with political Zionism and not necessarily some kind of ethnic thing, right? You can't just distill it down to an ethnicity problem. I mean, many people do. You might disagree with me on that, but that is a sweeping generalization. Not every person who is of Jewish descent is sitting there trying to control everybody else's lives. So, people fall into this trap of finding a scapegoat and then going all in on hating that scapegoat. And now I'm seeing some well-known Christians on the internet, people like Mike Winger and other people, they're stepping in the gap saying like, wait a minute, you can't just like hate Jews, but then they're getting the backlash from the Jew haters. But also, it's just getting really messy and confusing. But I want everybody to take a deep breath, step back for a moment, and absorb this jingle.
5th gen warfare.
They're targeting you. They're targeting you.
5th gen warfare.
Fifth generation warfare. It's a topic that we've covered a lot. I mean, it's always something we fall back on in discussion because it's the war on narratives. It's a cognitive type of battlefield, whereas in the past, the things were a lot more kinetic, guns, swords, nukes on Hiroshima, Nagasaki, stuff like that, like real kinetic warfare. Well, 5GW or fifth generation warfare has a lot more to do with cognitive war, information war, psychology, emotions. It has to do with everything that's not physical per se in order to influence certain behaviors, certain actions, whether it's to vote a certain way, whether it's to start typing certain things up on the internet to, support one belief system over another or whatever it may be. So those tactics have gotten to such a state that everybody has become victim. Even us. If you really think about the internet now, you can say anything, you can do anything. It goes back to my thesis that we are all being turned into agents, and people listening, I'm doing air quotes, agents, okay? Because everybody who's speaking on the internet, they are expressing something, right? They're expressing an opinion, they're expressing a thought, and we are under this impression of free speech, allowing those things to take place without censorship. We know firsthand censorship is real. We talked about the jab. We showed some factual documents, and boom, the Face Like the Sun channel is gone for 4 years. So censorship is real. That is a problem. I understand that. We've experienced it. But also, the narrative crafting is at a level now, post-COVID. I'm sure the social engineers, through the simulations that they ran, like the population simulations, they knew that there was going to be a backlash against the vaccines and the whole system. And I'm sure they knew that post-COVID, they're going to be able to create a much more active fifth generation warfare where people who would otherwise maybe mind their own business are suddenly on the internet and expressing certain things or talking about certain issues, and everything becomes political in the end. And I think ultimately what we will get to, and maybe put it in the Red Book, we'll get to a point where cognitive sovereignty will become an issue. It's like, wait a minute, hold on. We're being bombarded with everything. We talked about dream technology. They want to advertise to us in our dreams. They want to advertise in outer space, quote unquote. It's everywhere, and it's hard to get away from. And so what do you do? What do you do? For us, for me, it's been consistently preach the gospel, stick to that, stick to value for value, and then try to find like-minded communities, like-minded people. And it's tough because you're never going to find somebody that completely agrees with you. And I would implore that if you're surrounded by people that completely agree with you on everything, you may not be getting out enough, right? You may not be challenging your thoughts and your worldview enough. I think it's important and healthy to have healthy discussions, debates, things of that nature with others, and even just, not hate those people. It's so easy to just label someone something and then hate them. And that's like the primal issue of all politics is, oh, you're a Democrat, I'm not going to like you. Look, we may disagree entirely on politics. We may disagree entirely on religion, but ultimately the biblical mandate is to love God and love your neighbor. So if you're not loving them, and part of loving them, obviously, is to challenge them on some of their worldview, and for someone else to be a good neighbor to you, maybe that's what being a good neighbor is to you, is for them to challenge your view. So I bring all this up because what we're seeing now, everything we talk about is in this context of fifth generation warfare, and it makes it difficult to have conversations about things because the words that are being used that were traditionally reserved for the researchers, for the fringies, for the conspiracy theorists, now they're being used by politicians.
State-sponsored propaganda machinery.
Propaganda is one of those words. PSYOP is also one of those words.
PSYOPs.
Okay, this is Business Insider, right? This is like a pretty mainstream outlet. We identified it as potentially an intelligence-supported type of operation over there. But Business Insider had a headline, Scott Bessent, Canada's Reagan ad is, quote, propaganda, part of a PSYOP. Okay, so in just one headline from Business Insider, we have the word propaganda, we have the word psy-op, we have Scott Bessent, and here's how confusing it's getting. Let me read the story a little bit, and I'll riff on it a little bit more. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said Canada's anti-tariff ad featuring former U.S. President Ronald Reagan was, quote-unquote, propaganda and, quote, part of a psy-op. On Sunday on Meet the Press on NBC, Bessent answered a question about why President Donald Trump was setting trade policy based on a television ad he didn't like. The ad, released on October 16th, contained a voiceover of Reagan's 1987 address in defense of free and fair trade. Quote, "This is the kind of propaganda against U.S. citizens," Bessent said to NBC. It's psyops. Okay. Now, I'm not going to get into the specifics of this. All right. So there's a commercial or an ad that was made, and you know, the question being asked to Bessent is, hey, Trump should not be basing trade policy, international trade policy, based on a TV commercial he didn't like, right? Of course, mainstream media, NBC, they're going to do that. They're going to make it very petty, right? And Scott Bessent's reaction to this, a response to this, is, no, this type of ad was propaganda against U.S. citizens, and it's a psychological operation. That's what psyops are. And he's right, okay? He's right that this ad, using Reagan's voice, is propaganda, is psychological, a psychological operation to get people to think a certain way about certain issues. However, here's the part that makes it even more confusing when you step back away from everything. What Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is saying here is also propaganda. It is also a psychological operation. Okay, and then on top of that, for Business Insider to use it in a headline, that is also its own propaganda and its own psychological operation. And so the point is, nothing is not propaganda. Nothing is not psychological, a psychological operation at this point. And so when you realize that, you have to move a certain way. You have to be considerate about what you're saying and what you're doing. And I think, you know, this will shape how we conduct ourselves on the internet, especially moving forward. Because if you're going to say something on the internet, you know, you better know what you're talking about. At the very least, know the source or the source of truth that you're trying to point to. And, you know, some people might think like, oh, you know, if you do something anonymously on the internet, maybe you're not really being truthful or honest about what you're doing or what you're saying and all these kinds of things. And I can see that perspective. Someone might not be happy if, you know, they're like, hey, you're talking about transparency and truth and all this stuff, but then you're anonymous, right? Like, for example, Basil. Basil is more or less anonymous because he doesn't put his real name out there and, you know, all these things. But I think in general, even if you are operating anonymously, it's not about the person. I know it's supposed to be. In the world, it's about the person. It's about the personality. It's about the character. It's about the individual that's up there or speaking or whatever. It's all about them, right? But in reality, it's not about the person. Those are just messengers. It's about the message. What's being conveyed? What's the message? What's ultimately the goal? What's ultimately the objective here? Is it just a selfish thing? Is it something that can build something bigger for the future? Is it something that can maybe be a big harvest for Christ? There are things moving in every aspect that is unseen. And we know this. We live with an unseen realm that is just beyond our sight, all of our senses. And it's just as much important for those things to be in line. And sometimes when it comes to just appearances, it may not look like those things are aligning. But I think they are. And even when it comes to something like this with Business Insider, ultimately, you know, Business Insider gets the clicks because they're getting attention. They're using the word propaganda. They're using the phrase psy-op. So they're going to get that attention there. They get to pretend like they're just, fair and whatever, balanced, and just reporting information, which I've noticed a lot of mainstream outlets are moving back towards being a little bit less political outright and a lot more just kind of, hey, here's the information. Here's kind of the quote unquote facts. We're not going to spin it too much. Although, you dig into the article itself and you'll find that a lot of times there is spin. It's impossible not to have spin. And the faster we realize it, really as a society, but I think the church needs to really step up in this regard, is as soon as we recognize that that's what's going on, the sooner we can stress a lot less about all these things going on, because it's so easy to just see something or read something and be like, oh, you got to do something about it. Well, we got to, you want to do something, especially men, right? Men are just like, oh, we got to solve the problem, right? My wife will bring up something and I'll be like, all right, we're going to do this. And she'll be like, I don't need a solution right now. I just need someone to, hear me. It's like, okay, all right. I'll just listen for right now. But I have in my mind, I have solutions that are coming up, potential things that we can try out. And it's not a great thing because a lot of times it's Jimmy rigging a situation as far as I'm concerned. I'm not great at making things solving things cleanly. I'm always putting a whole bunch of different parts together to make it work. But in general, I wanted to start here because it's a good setup for what we're going to talk about as we move into different things. But the topics are becoming more and more fascinating here, because everything we've discussed over the last 10, 15 years is, again, like I mentioned, and we keep mentioning it, and I'm sure you're sick of hearing me talk about it and sick of Basil ranting about it. But it's this idea that like, oh, everything we talked about is now mainstream. It's like, yeah, that's just how it works. When you're a watchman, you're on the watchtower, you're able to see further down the horizon compared to someone on the ground. I mean, depending on, what shape the whole thing is. But in general, in principle, people are on a watchtower so they can see further out. If you're on a mountaintop, you can see much further out what's coming. And that's all it is. We just were on a higher watchtower than most people. And hey, transhumanism, this lockdown thing, it looks like they're going to try to do a virus lockdown, mandatory vaccine thing. The transhumanist thing is going to happen a lot more. AI is going to come down the pike. Quantum computers, aliens, the Great Deception. How long have we been talking about the Great Deception? About how they're going to tell us there's going to be aliens, they're either here or they show up or whatever. And we played out so many and had so many conversations over the years about what that might look like, including, this conversation about ultimately we don't even ever need to see a single alien in order for the alien narrative to actually take hold. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing today with this whole 3-Eye Atlas thing. People are coming up with all kinds of ideas about what this means, who's behind it, blah, blah, blah. We'll touch on some of that in a minute here. But it's become more mainstream and more people are seeking knowledge that helps contextualize this stuff, because before it was a hobby, okay? Talking about aliens, George Tsoukalos with his hair, it's like the pyramids, aliens, whatever, the wheel, aliens, everything was aliens. And of course, our friend Chris White, the brilliant documentary, go find it. It's called Ancient Aliens Debunked. And it will, he did a great job of just explaining. It wasn't even about anything super hardcore. It was just, hey, all these claims made by the ancient alien people, just to let you know, there's a much more logical, reasonable, basic understanding of why or how those things happened. 10 million views or something on YouTube with Chris White's documentary, Ancient Aliens Debunked. And nobody cares, right? 10 years later, everyone's like, they found this thing under the pyramid. And it's and who knows, it might be something esoteric and occult. And certainly I am of the camp that a lot of ancient technology was lost in the flood, in my opinion. So it's not that it's not something to explore, but just to say that, hey, let's do our due diligence, look at all the different sides when it comes to something like aliens or pyramids or this 3-Eye Atlas thing. And let's not come to any hard conclusions because we don't know. And ultimately, we're under, with this 3-Eye Atlas thing, we are under the authority, if you will, I mean, we're under the authority of Christ, but in terms of that information, we are beholden to the people that are sky watchers, the people that are tracking this stuff up there. And they're doing it with, they're not, your armchair astronomer he's not getting a telescope to see what's going on. He's got to have the right type of technology to get that information. And how can we trust the technology? How can we trust the people that are relaying that information? There's just a lot of layers to it. So we have to take everything with a grain of salt. And I think for us, the healthy thing to do is to look at the bigger picture. What does this mean? What are the implications? Is there a cosmic level type of explanation? Yeah, of course. When you start getting into aliens, you're naturally going to start having that conversation about angels or demons or, supernatural things that are beyond. And here's where I want to move into Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna referencing the Book of Enoch, okay? Now, she says a couple things. I don't understand why. Okay, let me just play the clip, and then I'll talk about some of the issues I have with what she says here. And it's not so horrible or anything like that. It's just little things that bother me. Oh, hold on one second. I'm not showing the video. Let me try that again. All right, this is Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna talking about the 3i Atlas stuff. They showed her some of the footage that's out there. I mean, who knows if that's real footage? It looked kind of janky to me, but here she is responding to it.
Saw some interesting stuff. And so what I'll tell you is that footage, the fact that it was dead dropped to Burleson, I'm certain that there's more of where that comes from. And we are going to push for the declassification of stuff that we've seen, because I think the American people deserve to see it. But I think, you're never going to have the U.S. government admit or try to explain something if it's also somewhat not specifically pertaining to national defense. So if it's not tech that we've made not involving a foreign government, I think that you're going to see a direct statement from that. What's interesting, and I kind of went into this with Joe Rogan, is when we were talking to some of the witnesses, they don't call them extraterrestrial. They call them interdimensional. There's also this aspect of these things defying physics as we know it. And then you look into texts that were removed from the Bible, like the Book of Enoch, that actually specifically address technologies, if you will, that were given to mankind or of entities not of human origin.
Okay. So she's saying a few things here. The issue of, is it national security or is it beyond that? Because if this is technology that wasn't made by Americans or other foreign nations, then what are we dealing with? And we touched on the documentation from the 60s and 50s, post World War II, that talked about potential threats, outside threats that can, and you can always go back and find those clips of Reagan talking in the 80s. Speaking of Reagan from that first story, the world will unite if they see, if an alien shows up. That's one way for the world to unite and come together, that sort of thing. So that's one thing. She's going to go on and talk about what she's seen and how she can't talk about it. But she says something here. She's mentioned the word interdimensional, okay? Interdimensional, that they're not extraterrestrial, they are interdimensional. Now, that is a thesis that was outlined on the Face Like the Sun channel in 2011. It was not a new view, but it was not really popular yet. It was not an idea that was understood. And to me, it was a big revelation around 2009, 2010, when I realized, wait a minute, there is a lot of consistency between the reports of alien abduction and things like sleep paralysis with the history of demonic activity that people have reported throughout centuries. Similar type of entities or experiences, maybe not the same look or the same message, but very similar in the nature of how these experiences go. So that's one thing that I want to point out, that she's a senator is describing, or at least mentioning, how some of the witnesses talked about these things as not extraterrestrial, but interdimensional, which is a fancy word for spiritual or supernatural, right? It's the unseen realm interacting with our realm, our physical realm. Then she said, the Book of Enoch, okay? Love the Book of Enoch, okay? I'm not dismissing the Book of Enoch. I think it's a great document that everybody needs to be familiar with, at least, especially now in 2025. If you're not familiar with the Book of Enoch at this point in your biblical studies, you might need to go back and do your work, because it helps explain so much of the biblical narrative, especially pertaining to what happened in Genesis 6 and so forth. And obviously the book of Jude basically quotes the Book of Enoch. And, you know, it's a very important document. Jesus seemed to be very familiar with the Book of Enoch. But here's the fact, okay? Here's the truth, or at least what we understand from the scholars. And not that the scholars are always right, but this is what is understood. The Book of Enoch was never removed from the Bible, okay? That's what she said. She said the Book of Enoch was removed from the Bible. No, it wasn't. It was never part of ancient Hebrew scripture. It was highly valued during the Second Temple era. The early Christians knew about it. The Jews leading up to Jesus were familiar with it. And so in that sense, very important document, because it frames a lot of what happened in the Old Testament and a lot of what Jesus did in the New Testament, why he did those things, right? So those are all part of the reason why the Book of Enoch is important, but it wasn't removed from the Bible, okay? Those are little things that I think, you know, give away that she's maybe not super familiar with it. She's kind of getting it second or third hand, and these are some talking points. And that's what I want to highlight is politicians, man. They'll bring up a topic and they'll just like say things that everyone goes, oh my gosh, and, you know, we're talking about the Book of Enoch now. And I, you know, even on X, I started seeing people sharing documentaries and old footage. And there's a lot of people that have made content on the Book of Enoch. So great. You know, more people they're able to get all that content up and running again. Hey, you know, watch my film, listen to my audio book, my podcast, whatever it is. But first of all, there's a lot more to the Book of Enoch. There's, you know, later writings. It seems to have been written over a few hundred years. And, you know, there are certain theological inconsistencies when you start getting into the nitty gritty of things with the Book of Enoch. There are things that don't jive with the Bible. So you gotta be very careful there. But I think it's a good book to learn about, to study. The Ethiopian Bible does include the Book of Enoch. The documents from Qumran that were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they also contain the Book of Enoch. So certainly, you know, it was an important part of ancient documentation when it comes to some of these things that are that have explanation for things that happened in, for example, Genesis 6. But my point is, use it for what it is, not for what it isn't, right? It's not necessarily inspired text. Now, you can have that debate, but if you do, come prepared. Know what's in the Book of Enoch front to back, at least in First Enoch. Know where you have some inconsistencies with the biblical text when it comes to certain aspects of angelology or cosmology. Not a whole lot, but, you know, some people will say, oh, the Book of Enoch explains it more. Well, sure, but just because something is explained more, does it mean it's true, or does it mean it's important from a biblical standpoint? You know, it's another debate to have, but it's also not the other side of the aisle, which I've often seen is, oh, the Book of Enoch is Gnostic. If you touch the Book of Enoch, you're a Gnostic and you're a heretic and you should never touch it. So I'm seeing these polarized views, and that's always interesting to me. To me, it's always like, okay, operation right there. It's divisive. It creates a chasm. It creates two different camps, and people fight over it, right? And people are basically fighting over mind share over this topic. So I think it's a book that is important to study, and clearly, if you study the history of the Book of Enoch, it's fascinating as well, because the earliest Jewish rabbis and stuff before Jesus, they did not accept it as canonical, as inspired in that time. And you know, there's all sorts of different issues, composite authorship. And obviously some limited circulation type stuff going on. However, it is a fascinating study because it is so relevant to understanding why Jesus did what he did in the New Testament, and also help explain everything about pretty much the whole Old Testament. Why did God tell the Israelites to go wipe out all these tribes? Well, they seem to have been some kind of descendant of the Nephilim, which are the offspring of the sons of God, or Bnei Ha-Elohim, the Watchers, and the daughters of Adam, which is described in the book of Genesis in chapter 6. It's the same story with a little bit more detail when it comes to the Book of Enoch. So all these things being said, I think it's fascinating that we have a congresswoman bringing up the Book of Enoch in this context. Now, I'm going to let her finish her little quote here, and then we'll move on.
Non-human intelligence. So these are all things to consider when addressing the topic, but based on what I've seen, not speculating, based on the evidence that I've seen, there's something out there. And based on what I'm saying is it's not, I think that it's along the lines of that video that you just saw.
Have they shown you? Okay, so
I have to be careful because I could get in trouble if I divulge what I've been shown in a skiff. So what I can tell you is I'm just telling you as me, not specifically addressing skiff stuff, that they're real. And I'm not the only one. You just saw the Secretary of State in a documentary addressing the same thing.
All right, good. Yeah, there's, what's his name? I forget, the PBD guy. So there you go. Yes, there's a lot here. There's a little bit more, but I think it's okay. That's enough for that clip. So people they're searching for explanations when it comes to this topic of quote unquote aliens or extraterrestrials, or now bringing into the conversation interdimensional, which opens up a whole new can of worms. Because if you are someone who has experienced psychedelic drugs, whether it's ayahuasca or, I've never done LSD. I've heard some things about LSD, but more so it's DMT, ayahuasca, some of these heavier type drugs. DMT specifically because of the research done by, forget the doctor's name, the guy, hold on, who did the DMT study? He wrote a couple books on the issue. Somebody in the chat is going to know, and they're going to yell it out. He's a doctor, professor from New Mexico, spirit molecule. Eric Straussman, that's his name, Dr. Eric Straussman. I think Joe Rogan brought him up a bunch too, so he's kind of in the cultural milieu because of Joe Rogan. But so now people are becoming exposed to the idea of the Book of Enoch or interdimensional as these plausible explanations for what's going on. And man, it goes back to that quote about the theologians, about the scientists and all these materialists and stuff. They climb the scale of, they climb this mountain of creation, and they're like, they get to the top and they're like, we've made it to the pinnacle. We have figured out that the world is intertwined with physical matter and unphysical things. And then there's like a bunch of theologians sitting there like, yeah, we've been saying that the whole time. So that seems to be the case, that more people culturally are being introduced to this. Now, part of this might be the reenchantment, the Carl Teichert idea that we are moving away from atheism, we are moving away from materialism into this new era of spirituality. And that will not a Christian spirituality, but more so an enchanted, esoteric knowledge becoming mainstream, which also jives with a lot of what was channeled to really important esoteric and occult authors in the last couple centuries, saying that, for example, Alice Bailey channeling Deja Kul, this ascended master, and the message was clear that we're going to have these world leaders, not world leaders, what did she call them? Workers of light that are going to spread this message, and people are going to awaken, and we're going to have this awakening of the masses to the truth about the cosmos and how we can become Christs. Right? Those are the messages that are out there. And the danger now, and I think it's very important moving forward, especially if you're a believer and you're in the church and stuff like that, be on guard for this, be aware of this. A lot of the new agey stuff is starting to, actually, it's always kind of been like this in a sense, going back to Gnosticism in the first century, Gnosticism being rejected because of its really fundamental difference with biblical cosmology, but using similar words. It's coming back around where certain words are being used in the context of Christianity, even though they're not, or they're redefining Christian words to mean things that are more esoteric. And that's really dangerous. That, I think this is where the church, we've really got to be on guard, because there's going to be stuff that sounds super Christian, super biblical, but you do like one Google search and you're like, oh, that was channeled by some entity. The Enneagram is a great example. The Enneagram, I did a whole video on this several years ago, where, and there's still some churches are all about the Enneagram. It's wild to me. But there's footage of the guy, I think his name's Rohl, R-O-H-L. I forget his first name. There's like an interview of him saying like, oh, I just automatic writing. I just got a download of all the personalities for the Enneagram. And it was like, do you know, bro, do you know what that is? That is not God tapping on the show. Hey there, Rohl. Like, here's some things you can write down that'll, be your Christian horoscope. No, that's not, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of that stuff going on. Personal revelation becoming doctrine. And that is the pattern of a lot of world religions. I mean, even Christianity, in a sense. If you talk about Paul having a supernatural encounter and that turning into the foundation for a lot of the epistles in the New Testament. So there is a model for that, but is every single time somebody communicates with something or someone from beyond, is that really God speaking? And I would argue most of the time, a majority of the time, no, it is not God speaking to you. It is not just an ascended master speaking to you. It is the principalities and powers, cosmic wickedness. Even Satan can appear as an angel of light, right? So it's there's got to be some discernment. Discernment. That is the key here. And these conversations might upset some Christians that are into certain aspects of certain practices, if you will, when it comes to methods of prayer and things of that nature. And, it doesn't mean you have to hate those people. Again, back to the top of the conversation, doesn't mean they're bad people or you got to hate them or they're all evil or they're all heretics. I think for people like us, if you're listening to this and you've been around for a while, it's just a responsibility of like, hey, if you're in a church and you see something, say something, for that whole see something, say something, but do it gently, do it kindly, do it in private at first, and be ready, have your resources, have your research done, and keep it simple. Like nobody wants to sit there and listen to your 8-page dissertation on why you think some meditation thing is wrong or something like that. It's not going to work like that. It's more about having just natural conversations, having a time of fellowship, and enlightening, if I can use that word, or edifying is probably a better word, edifying your congregation or your peers in the church about these things. And not that you're right and they're wrong. Maybe they'll come up with something that you didn't know about, and then you can research together. But if you are someone who has gone down the rabbit trail and has looked at almost everything there is to see when it comes to all the rabbit trails going on, it's, I think, a very important, responsible thing to do, to let others understand where you're coming from with that and have your documentation so that you're ready to show them like, hey, this is why, like the Enneagram, great example. Like, hey, do you know where this comes from? Do you know that the two people that they reference with the origin of this both say they got it through automatic writing and channeling? I mean, shouldn't that raise a little red flag? And if you don't know what channeling is, it won't raise a red flag, right? They won't know. There's certain translations of the Bible that recently, just in my local area, a pastor came around, was holding one of these translations, was like, "Yeah, you don't kind of like this translation. Go look at who that guy." It takes 3 seconds to find out who this person was, and once we did that, right away, it was not a whole bunch of people said, the people that are discerning are saying, "Hey, that's not a translation. That is almost a commentary. It's almost a rewriting of the scriptures. It's not a translation. They're putting their own words in there." And then the people themselves saying, "Oh, I was shown this, I was shown a message, and I was shown this light. I was shown that I need to write this version of the Bible." And again, I'm not going to get in the way of people getting saved if that's how people are coming to Christ, but ultimately that's not going to put them in a good place if that Bible, that quote unquote translation of the Bible, is all they're relying on. We have the tools now. There's no excuse. We have the tools today. Take advantage of it. Get into the concordance. Get into the original language. Learn about the history of the manuscripts, how they've come together, which ones we rely on, which ones are less reliable, how many manuscripts we have, which is an argument for the accuracy of the scriptures. We have more fragments and more pieces of the Bible than any other document in history. It's just a fact. So those are things to keep in mind. Now, I forgot to play the biblical jingle for this part, so I'll play it right now.
It's got to be biblical.
But we're going to move right into, because we're talking about this whole issue, we're going to talk about the aliens. Oh, we're made by the aliens. Sorry, Alex Jones. I stepped on you.
We're made by the aliens.
Aliens.
Yeah.
Aliens.
That's right. Aliens. Okay. Everyone's talking about it now. We've touched on it for the last couple episodes, but it's just the buzz is getting louder. Manhattan-sized space object 3I Atlas has grown a tail, a possible sign of alien maneuver. Harvard scientists. Okay. Now, what's hilarious is that if you've been part of the Canarium for some time, then you would know that we have been on this trail of Avi Loeb, the Harvard scientist, for a while now, for a couple of years now, because we've noticed that this guy, Avi Loeb, he's doing all these wild things. Like, he's the guy that went out into the ocean, middle of the ocean, when Oumuamua, I think, was the thing that came around, and maybe another asteroid or something landed in the water. Him and the founder of Cardano, which is a crypto blockchain, ADA, Charles Hoskinson, they're on a boat in the middle of the ocean, and they're like trying to retrieve these pieces of the asteroid and stuff. And so he's been on this quest for this alien narrative for at least a couple years. It's been more than that, but it's been at least a couple years. It's been about 2 years that we have pointed to it and been like, "Hey, there's something going on with this something with the Avi Loeb guy. Like, why is he getting all this press about the alien narrative?" And he's got the Harvard scientist title, so there's automatic credibility there. What's going on there? And then you look at where his loyalties lie. And obviously, it'll harken back to some of the discussions we had at the beginning of the podcast here. But the article here from the New York Post says, new images reveal that Manhattan-sized interstellar object 3I Atlas has started to sport a tail, indicating that it could possibly be a maneuvering alien craft, one Harvard scientist suggested. After exhibiting signs of an incredibly strange anti-tail since first cropping up in the solar system in July, 3I Atlas is now showing evidence of a true cometary tail. Images taken by Spain's Nordic Optical Telescope in the Canary Islands in September revealed. Hey, there we are. We're secretly involved, folks. The Canary Islands are here. These new images show materials being peeled off behind the 33 billion ton object.
33 is the number of completion of the Great War.
You know, it's funny because we always kind of joked about the 33, and I know No Agenda did it too. You know, by the time No Agenda was doing it, I remember Derek and Sharon Gilbert doing it way back, 2009, 2010. They were pointing out the 33 patterns in the mainstream. But come on, man. Come on. Why? They're always sneaking in the 30. It's almost like they're telling people like us, like, hey, you guys know, we know. So here's some more 33s. New images show materials being peeled off behind the 33 billion ton object as it travels towards the sun and is hit with up to 33 gigawatts of solar radiation. So let me get this straight. This is a 33 billion ton object that's also, it just happens to be getting hit with 33 gigawatts of solar radiation. What else is there? Harvard astrophysicist Avi Loeb wrote in a recent paper, however, the succession of an anti-tail and then the presence of a tail could be indicative of, quote, controlled maneuvering and a high-impact black swan event. Talk about a black swan. Get the aliens are here. Finally, the great deception. Finally, L.A. Marzulli can point at the sky and say it's a deception. 3I Atlas's anti-tail was a plume composed of mostly carbon dioxide and water with trace amounts of cyanide and a never-seen-in-nature nickel alloy that has only been used in human manufacturing. It's never seen in nature nickel alloy. Okay, so never seen in nature, which means there's man-made stuff there. Okay, all right. So is that a tip? This is our thing that's up there. It's just coming back. What if that was it? What if all the trash that we've ever made, you know, all the stuff that we've allegedly thrown up there, that somebody, you know, some alien was just like, you guys and your trash. You guys are trash, you know, and then they like make one giant 33 megaton or whatever it was, 33 ton object of all of our human trash. And then they just like send it right back to us. And it is going to hit us. It's going to hit us. Quote, if the object is an alien spacecraft slowing down, Loeb wrote, then the anti-tail would be evidence of a, quote, braking thrust maneuver, which would naturally change to a tail as a slowing procedure completed. The International Asteroid Warning Network added 3I Atlas to its list of targets earlier this week and began monitoring the object for scientific purposes. The group wrote on its website, quote, while it poses no threat, Comet 3I Atlas presents a great opportunity for the IAWN community to perform an observing exercise due to its prolonged observability from Earth and its high interest to the scientific community. So there you go. Part of me thinks, so there's multiple layers to this, right? Part of me is thinking, who needs funding? That should all be the first question when anytime stuff like this happens is, all right, who needs funding? Last week we talked about how Trump wants to shut down NASA. That was like the big narrative, right? Okay. What about other space agencies or private space agencies? Who needs money? Who needs cash? That's number one. Does Harvard need cash? They always say Harvard scientist. So it's making me think Harvard needs a little something, you know, from the government, a little extra something, even though the government's still shut down right now. So that's a possibility in sort of a mundane monetary propaganda psy-op type of situation where it's like, all right, we need some money. We need the world to find out about this. How do we do it? Now, the other thing, and this is a narrative I've heard often, the mainstream media is not talking about this. Mainstream media is not talking about it. Sure. Mainstream media doesn't have to talk about it per se. There is method to that madness as well. I think 10 years ago, if mainstream media wasn't talking about something and the internet was on fire for that topic, okay, maybe there's something there. In 2025, if the mainstream media is not talking about something and the internet is on fire about it, there's a reason. There's maybe a a level of a Streisand effect. It's not quite Streisand because they're not saying anything about it. So usually a Streisand effect is don't look at the Three-Eye Atlas topic, right? If the mainstream media are out there saying that, then it's certainly the Streisand effect. They want people to look into it. But with this, maybe it's just that you need to get more of that momentum from the alt media before mainstream picks it up. You need to let all the people who are truth seekers to flush out all of their theories and create all that content, because we still are in a transition period from legacy media into alt media and independent media behind that, underneath all that. So maybe that's what it is. Of course, some people don't even believe there is a space, right? So this is all mute. This is all propaganda and psy-op. If you're in that camp, that all of everything up there is fake or not real or whatever. So there's that possibility, and that would just double down on the idea that this is a psy-op or some kind of operation propaganda type thing. Or if it is something, then how are we going to know? What's going to happen? What is the thing? Well, here's a theory, guys. Here's a thesis. Here's a guy who allegedly remote viewed Three-Eye Atlas. Now, remote viewing, a government sponsored technique to potentially see or travel into, spiritually or non-physically, travel or view certain things from various places in time. And this individual said that this has the TikTok music, so it's kind of annoying. But this is a guy talking about what he saw when he remote viewed Three-Eye Atlas.
I remote viewed the craft, and I got direct information from that. Okay. And my take on that, I did just remote view the amount of people on board. I also remote viewed the technology was inside, the whole decks, the pods, the whole thing on the inside. So I can see they are using antimatter and fusion technology, and they also have pods housing less than 5 million Draco reptilian soldiers inside. And so they're all dormant. They're not using space. They're not eating. They're not doing anything. They're just basically just waiting to be awakened. And they're all in pods.
You use the word soldier.
Yes.
That is a little unnerving.
Yeah, I mean, the Draco race is known to be fighting wars in their genes. That's what they do. And at the same time, it's for their own safety, that they are trying to protect themselves. They don't know what's coming. They don't know who they're going to be facing. So that's why they keep those soldiers in that situation. They're not active. So when they travel through space, they just keep them in that state.
Oh, so it doesn't mean they're necessarily coming here with soldiers to attack.
That's correct. It doesn't mean that they're coming in to wake them up all and, to invade Earth. That's not the plan. I'm just saying that they are there, just in case, because it is a mothership.
All right, Sebastian, big question. While you were remote viewing Three-Eye Atlas, this comet, did you pick up on any type of agenda for why it's approaching Earth?
Yeah, but I don't think I want to talk about that. It's just, I believe that, yes, there is an agenda from the Dracos, but at the same time, for whatever I've seen moving forward, either way, humanity will prevail.
Yay! All right, that's a good message. Either way, humanity will prevail. All right, good job, remote viewer. Okay, according to him, 5 million Draco reptilian soldiers are inside this thing. And what are they going to sprinkle out a mill? Drop a couple million Draco reptilians down to Earth. And boom, there you go. We got the great deception. We got the Book of Revelation unfolding before our eyes. Although the Locust Army comes out from the abyss. But, I've even theorized maybe the abyss is space. So these are, again, very sensational. How in the world are we going to verify this at any level? Right. So this is the problem. Even if this is true, literally we would have to have motherships showing up in the sky. We'd need like 1 or 2, maybe like 10 of those Draco reptilian soldiers to defreeze and come down and shake Trump's hand. Maybe Trump will dance with them, sign a couple deals with a squeaky marker. I don't know. I don't think that's what's going to happen personally, but you know, quite the setup here. Quite the setup. We don't know what exactly is going to roll out and play out, but it seems to be that everyone has a take. Everyone has a take. Now, my other sort of take here on this is that what if they need an excuse? When I say they, like the social engineers, they need an excuse to release technology that we've had for a long time. And what if it's the case that, hey, you know, no one's really going to believe the technology, that it's going to be, there's going to be too much geopolitical tension for one country or one group to be like, hey, we discovered this, whatever, this technology or this substance or this material, and it's going to revolutionize all computing and all quantum computing, whatever. It's too much. It's going to create wars. It's going to create all this stuff. So let's have it come from an alien asteroid thing from up there. That way, you know, it's kind of like, hey, you know, it's a thing from up there. Like, we don't know. Is it an ancient alien thing? Is this, we don't know, but it's just technology. And it just so happens to help us build quantum computers at scale. And boom, you got your narrative, you got your technology release, you got your excuse, you got your narrative. Then it's going to still proliferate all kinds of narratives on the ground. If you are a believer of ancient aliens, you'll say, oh, the alien gods gifted mankind with another technology or whatever. I mean, it can be very much spun in various ways. And I think there's something to that. But again, that's just my own speculation there. If anything comes out of this, we'll see. We'll see what happens. It could be that, you know, a couple months from now, we're going to be like, well, what happened to 3i Atlas? Here's another thing to watch out for with this. If it's nothing, just pay attention, because there's going to be another thing. You know, if you track Avi Loeb, Oumuamua, some other there's always something. And so just keep track of that. Keep track of that. Now, I'm running out of time here. So I got to get going to pick up my son at school. So I'm going to have to take off here in a minute. But I want to connect this 3i Atlas thing to this story here from Newsweek. Newsweek we've identified as very much an intel outlet. But I need to touch on this because now, people have thought, you know, pointed out 3i Atlas, like 3i, the third eye, you know, Atlas being technically the Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, Atlas, which is a telescope network. But here in this article, just take a listen, okay? This is from Newsweek. Tallest statue in the West proposed to honor America's 250th anniversary. Okay, we know the 250 is coming up next year. We know there's like a UFC thing Trump's planning, all this kind of stuff. Now, if you know history, you know who made the Statue of Liberty, right? So we're having another one of these moments. The French sculpting company has said it wants to build the tallest statue in the West to commemorate the 250th anniversary of the United States in 2026. When contacted by Newsweek over the phone, the Paris-based company Atelier Misor confirmed the project was genuine and asked for written questions, which were submitted by email. Okay, so they talk about why it matters, what to know. Quote, so this is Atelier Misor on X. After months of hard work, we're proud to unveil the statue we'll build to honor the 250th anniversary of the United States. The Guardian of Liberty. The Guardian of Liberty shall go up. Quote, what you see here is just a scale model. The real one will be gigantic, the tallest statue in the West. So many people have offered to fund it, but the real challenge will be getting visas so we can build it on American soil. Finishing it in less than a year won't be easy, but as Napoleon once said, impossible is not French. Now, okay, there is a statue here that they show. It is, and they show the people building it. Would they look like, I'm not going to say anything. Okay, so they're the Frenchmen who are building this. And it is a statue of a man, a very well-built man. he works out, holding a giant orb. If you are familiar with this type of imagery, this is Atlas. That is Atlas, folks. That is Atlas, the famous mythological Atlas. So, is there a connection with 3i Atlas? I don't know, but I'm just saying it's kind of interesting that the French want to build us a giant statue of Atlas for the 260th, or I'm sorry, the 250th anniversary of the U.S. And of course, the Atlas, it has so many different esoteric symbolism going on. It's considered the cosmic pillar, or some people call it the axis mundi, which connects heaven to earth. Hello, what are we talking about? This thing from the outer space coming in. In esoteric traditions, you got Hermeticism, Kabbalah, Freemasonry. The pillar symbolizes a link between the spiritual matter and the divine matter, the unseen stuff. It's a bridge between the two. And it also symbolizes the initiation of the burden of divine knowledge, right? Which is very much Garden of Eden type of conversation. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the forbidden fruit that you're not supposed to eat. And in Hermetic and Theosophical context, Atlas was an analogy or an allegory for the human soul upholding the cosmic order. And when you talk about Atlantean philosophies or theosophy, a lot of New Age mysticism, they will mention Atlas in the context of Atlantis. They make the linguistic connection of like Atlas, Atlantis, and they'll say, oh, there must be something there. So, and you can get into the zodiac and alchemy and all these different things. So in the context of the Bible, this Atlas character is akin to a Nephilim, is akin to maybe a Watcher, but more so a Nephilim. A lot of people or a lot of esotericists consider Atlas to be an interpretation of Prometheus, the light bearer, Lucifer, right? So maybe it's Lucifer, which wouldn't be a surprise since, they gave us the Statue of Liberty, which is also Sophia, which is the goddess of wisdom, same origin there. So I'm not saying there's a definite connection there, but I just find it interesting that the French want to build us another statue. It's going to be the biggest statue in the West, beautiful statue. And it's going to be Atlas, while we are freaking out, or part of the internet is freaking out about 3i Atlas. And this guy right here talking about how it carries 5 million Draco reptilian soldiers. So, hey, you know what? Give your life to Jesus, folks, before it's too late. Because, once the 5 million Draco reptilian soldiers show up, it's game on, folks. It's game on. Everything we talked about, everything we warned about. Put on the full armor of God. Pray up, But if I had to bet, if I would, leaning into my degenerate proclivities, if I had to put a bet on it, I will say nothing really happens with this 3i Atlas. Or maybe parts of it, again, like shatter off or something, and we are able to gain new technology from it. I think that's as far as it goes. And then Avi Loeb will be off to some other project, and the buzz will be something else. So there you go. That's all I have. I was going to get into Trump's visit to Asia. I was going to get into Israel bracing for propaganda war, going back to the conversation at the beginning of the show. They're letting global journalists into Gaza, but they need to control the narrative. So they're like, we're going to show them all the stuff that is not just Hamas videos. Like, we're going to actually show them with, IDF escorting them a tour of all the things going on in Hamas. It's like, yeah, that's how you shape narrative. Okay, that's 5th generation warfare. If you're allowing journalists to come and you're only showing them what you want to show them, that is crafting the narrative. That is a form of propaganda. They understand that. The world understands that. More people need to understand that so that we're not so easily taken away by all the stuff we're being shown. So, all right. I have to get out here. I'm so bummed that I can't go much longer here because it's only an hour. But I appreciate everybody. Hopefully we'll be back. I might go live tomorrow just because today was so short. I may just do an impromptu live stream tomorrow and cover a couple more stories and maybe have some conversations with some people if they want to pop in. So look out for that. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I appreciate you. God bless. Think outside the cage, and we will see you soon. God bless.